I'm sorry to stop this bubbling conversation. It's so wonderful to see so many of you in the room for this event. So I'm Gillian Triggs, for those of you who don't know me, the President of the Human Rights Commission, and it's a huge pleasure to welcome you all to our Commission offices. And may I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and respect their elders. Well, we're here to celebrate the report and the launch of that report of the Willing to Work inquiry into employment discrimination against older Australians and Australians with disability. And there it is, this remarkable document. It was, of course, launched officially by the Attorney General earlier this month in Canberra. But today we hope to hear more of her work and how the inquiry progressed from Commissioner Ryan herself. And we have some wonderful visitors with us. Perhaps I could first acknowledge the commissioners. We have Dr. Tim Sook-Parmesan with us. We also have a very distinguished colleague of mine, Professor Ron McCallum, and Professor Ros Croucher, who has now a particular inquiry into elder abuse, which will be a wonderful segue or follow on from this research. May I also very warmly welcome two of our most recently appointed commissioners that you may have been reading about in the media, who will take over from Susan. The Age Discrimination Commissioner, Dr. Kay Patterson, and the Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Alastair McEwen. And they will be starting their work with us later in July. But we are really delighted by these appointments. They will continue Susan's important work. And it's perhaps an indication of just how much Susan has been able to achieve that the attorney felt the need to split the positions again and go back to a full-time commissioner for age and a full-time commissioner for disability. So we couldn't be happier by those appointments. The quality is exceptionally high. Well, before handing over to Susan, I'd like to recognise also that her appointment does come to an end. And this is one of the last opportunities for us to recognise the contribution that Susan's made. So I'm going to embarrass her for a few minutes, if she'll excuse me. She really has been a remarkable advocate for disabilities and for older Australians over the last 5 years. We've been remarkably fortunate to have somebody of Susan's calibre here at the Commission. She was, of course, the Distinguished Senator for the ACT, and she's the first woman to be appointed to a Labor cabinet, a remarkable achievement. She was appointed initially as the Age Discrimination Commissioner, but she's demonstrated how a woman of a certain age can build on her professional and political career to continue to make a very significant contribution to public life. And I think, I've no doubt at all, she'll continue to do so when she finishes here. Susan's worked tirelessly to build respect for older people in Australia and on her joint appointment for those with a disability. And she's brought those skills to achieve very significant outcomes. A key feature of her appointment has been that she's transposed negative attitudes towards older people and those with disabilities into a much more positive approach. And I think that is the great legacy of her work. I'd just like to say a word or two about the inquiry itself. It's the culmination of a year's work by Commission staff into the nature, prevalence and effects of both age and disability in the workforce. The inquiry found discrimination against Australians with a disability and older Australians to be persistent and systemic. While they are willing to work, they're frequently barred from doing so, with significant and damaging impacts on their lives. Indeed, we know from our investigation and conciliation service at the Commission, dealing with about 23,000 inquiries and formal complaints a year, that 2/3 of those complaints arise in the context of employment and the delivery of goods and services. So while we talk about and advocate for a lot of things here at the Commission, from asylum seekers, LGBTI, Indigenous young people in our institutions, we know that for most Australians, for most of the time, it's about access in a fair way to work that is their preoccupation, and that's across all cultures and races and ages. So this work is very important. We can't operate at the Commission on anecdote. We must work on the basis of evidence and data, and Susan's report includes very comprehensive data and makes a number of positive recommendations. Another feature of the research is that Susan has called on the business and employer groups to provide leadership in knocking down the barriers that stand in the way of engaging in fruitful work. And engaging with the business community is a priority for the Commission, and there's a growing recognition that to respect human rights is good for business, as the evidence mounts that to use the skills and experience of those with disability and aged Australians will add significantly to GDP. So may I very warmly congratulate Susan and the team here at the Commission for the report, and please join me in welcoming Susan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gillian, for that very generous introduction and for setting the tone of this event at such a level. I would also like to start by acknowledging the Indigenous owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora, and express my respect to their elders past and present, and to any Indigenous persons who have joined us today, and I know there are a few. Well, and I also acknowledge my fellow Commissioner Tim Soutphommasane is with us today, and with Gillian express my delight that I will be succeeded by not one but two very distinguished Australians, Dr. Kay Patterson. Kay and I are in the Senate at the same time on opposite sides, but I don't know that that stopped us combining forces on being fairer to all Australians. So Kay is a particularly welcome successor, and Alistair McCallum is replacing me in my briefer role as Discrimination Commissioner, and he will be, again, a very able and experienced representative of the disability community, himself being a person who has lived with profound deafness and achieved a stunning career. So both of them are going to make a big impact at the Commission, and I'm delighted. And of course, our special guest, Professor Ron McCallum, who has been chair of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of People with Disability, amongst numerous other distinguished legal appointments. And I'll introduce Ron a little more later because he's going to speak to us, but I don't think we have in Australia a more distinguished and valuable fellow citizen than Ron McCallum. And I'd also like to welcome guests who may be joining us remotely through our live streaming, and also acknowledge the Auslan interpreters and AI media who are providing live captioning services today. Well, as Gillian reminded us, almost 18 months ago, the Commission received a request from Attorney General George Brandis to conduct a national inquiry into workplace discrimination against older people and people with disability, and this was to be Australia's first such national stocktake of these important issues. I personally was delighted to be given the task of leading this work. I'd already formed the view throughout my term as Age Discrimination Commissioner and more recently as Disability Discrimination Commissioner that the denial of the right to work was one of the most widespread and pernicious attacks on the rights of individuals we see in Australia today. The scale of the problem is huge. The implications of this denial on such a scale are damaging all round to our community, to the national economy, to business, but most of all to the hundreds and thousands of individuals who, though willing to work and capable, are denied the opportunity to do so. And through this discrimination, they are denied the benefits of dignity, independence, a sense of purpose, and social connectedness that work brings. Belief in the rights and benefits of work has always been a core value for me. I've spent my long working life committed to the rights of all Australians to these benefits, regardless of gender, race, culture, age, or disability. So the fit was perfect for me, and I again place on record my thanks to Attorney General George Brandis for sending us this reference. My starting position was this: everyone has a right to work, but too many capable older Australians and Australians with disability are denied this right because of discrimination. It was my job to explore as widely and deeply as possible the real experiences of those suffering discrimination and to come to an understanding of the causes. Even more challenging, I needed to identify proposals for change, proposals that would eliminate this discrimination, proposals that could and would be implemented by all the stakeholders, government, business, the community and individuals themselves. We consulted widely with older people, with people with disability, as well as with employers of all sizes across all sectors, and with advocates, legal practitioners, policy experts, academics, industry representatives and unions. And some of these people with whom we consulted are with us today, and I welcome you. Our consultations did take us all over Australia so that our understanding reflects what is happening in small remote country towns, as well as our populous suburbs and as well as in our bulging capital cities. These contributions, diverse as they were, did align with all available data to support the view that far too many older people and people with disability in Australia do not enjoy the basic human right to work. Just a quick summary of those data. Now, the ABS shows that while people aged 55 years and over make up roughly a quarter of the population, they make up only 16% of the workforce. This age cohort is the fastest growing in Australia and will remain so for the foreseeable future. Labour force participation declines sharply with age. Last year, over 73% of Australians between the ages of 55 and 59 were participating in the labour force. But when we get to 60 to 64-year-olds, it was only 56%, and over 65, only 12.7%. Now, this sharp decline cannot be allowed to continue. The number of over 65s will double by 2055, when life expectancy will be well over 90 for both men and women. Without the changes we recommend, people who lose their jobs in their 50s may live up to another 40 years without paid employment. Now, a recent ABS report showed that most people now expect to work until they're 70. They expect to, they want to, but will they find jobs? And when we turn to people with disability, as surveyed in 2015, not only is the discrimination worse than that against older people, but it is not improving. Over 53% of people with disability were participating in the labour force, compared with 83% of people without disability. Not only are people with disability much more likely to be unemployed, but they endure longer periods of unemployment. Now, the figures are bad enough in themselves, but what was really shocking was that the figures have not changed significantly over the last 20 years. The persistence of this inequality over a couple of decades, when much has happened otherwise to improve our understanding of and support for people with disability, sends a strong signal. The signal is this: things will not change by themselves. Intervention is required to do what market forces alone will not. Well, why is this discrimination happening? People are shut out of work because of widely held underlying assumptions, stereotypes and myths associated with their age or disability. In the prevalence survey we commissioned last year, 27% of people over the age of 50 reported experiencing age discrimination at work. And a third of those who lost their jobs because of age discrimination eventually gave up looking for work. In the past year, and Gillian referred to our own experience of complaints here, over 70% of complaints about age discrimination were in the area of employment. And when we look at the very recent ABS figures on people with disability and employment, almost 1 in 12 reported they'd experienced discrimination or unfair treatment because of their disability, and very worrying, a much higher percentage of young people with disability, over 20%, reported experiencing discrimination. When asked about the source of discrimination, over a quarter of men and more than 1 in 5 women who experienced this discrimination because of disability reported that the source of the discrimination was an employer. So without change, especially change of employers' attitudes, young people with disability will face a lifetime of struggle to gain and keep employment. Apart from the often devastating impact on individuals, discrimination also has significant costs for the Australian economy. There are many recent powerful studies setting out the scale of what we are missing out on. One model shows that a 7% increase in mature age labour force participation would raise GDP by 2022 by approximately 25 billion. Another, done for the Productivity Commission, estimated that 50 billion could be added to our GDP by 2050 if Australia were to move up into the top 8 OECD countries for employment of people with disability. Now, these shifts, 7% more older workers getting jobs, aligning Australia with the stronger OECD performance for disability employment, these shifts are not huge. They are not beyond us, and they would be good for business. Organisations that are inclusive and diverse report tangible benefits in terms of productivity, performance, and innovation. Our report contains many examples of businesses with deliberate strategies of including older workers and people with disability, and they are businesses that are doing well. Some outstanding leaders of such businesses have joined us today, and I look forward to introducing them to you when we move to our panel discussion. But despite these positive examples, our major findings confirm that employment discrimination is systemic and requires action at multiple levels. Attitudes and beliefs need to change. We heard many distressing accounts from older men and women about the way they were treated in the workforce. For example, a quote, "Employers look at my grey hair and told me I don't fit their client or customer base," or "It's as if I had a use-by date on my forehead," or "I never felt my age until I had to look for work," or, and this was said to someone in their 50s, "You're old, why don't you take long service leave and retire?" Ageism in employment was so entrenched in some workplaces that people started to believe that this is just the way things are. We were told, if you're a 40-year-old Aboriginal man or woman, if you are still not employed, then the chance of getting future employment is very slim. Well, this might be the way things are, but they are not the way things have to be. Attitudes can be changed. We know in Australia that well-focused and sustained community education and awareness campaigns have changed entrenched attitudes and behaviours. For example, campaigns to reduce smoking, to wear seatbelts, to use sunscreen. All of these change behaviour significantly and to the benefit of the community. So we have recommended information and public education campaigns around these issues. We've recommended this to government and to business leaders. Turning to job seekers with disability, the inquiry learned of the pervasive lack of understanding among employers of the range, type and impact of different disabilities, and a perception that workplace adjustments for such employees are costly and difficult. One person told me, "I was with a disability job agency, but applied for the job not mentioning my disability. The company continually wanted me to increase my hours, even though I couldn't manage. When I told the manager, she said, if I'd told her I had a disability when I went for the job, she wouldn't have hired me." Another, after completing undergraduate degrees in commerce and business, Valerie unsuccessfully applied for more than 170 jobs in her chosen field of accounting. While waiting for one interview, Valerie overheard the interviewer say to another colleague on the panel, "Don't worry about the next candidate. We're only doing this interview so as to be seen to be doing the right thing." Now, our report is littered with true stories like these. These experiences take a toll on a person's self-worth and self-esteem. They undermine a person's self-confidence and impact their workforce performance and engagement. And they keep happening, and in all sorts of workplaces. Of course, various governments at various times have introduced policies and funding designed to assist people to overcome such discrimination and to get jobs. They have provided information and incentives to employers. Despite being well-intentioned, these government programs often fail. The inquiry found that with some government policies, the reduction of benefits that results from earning some part-time income from casual work actually creates disincentives. Other programs, and I refer specifically to the Commonwealth-funded job services programs, have limited impact. And they have limited impact because they fail to match the individual's capacities with the job to which they're recommending them. These failures, resulting from poor performance by publicly funded employment services, can make matters worse. They lead to employer disillusionment. Employers are risk averse and will say, oh yes, we tried an older person, or we tried a person with disability. It didn't work out, so we won't be doing that again. In the report, I've presented many personal accounts from disappointed employees and from employers who were willing but were given the wrong advice. These stories and the supporting data tell us that business as usual is not enough. Things need to change now. How should they change? Well, let me at the outset be clear that change to be effective needs to suit all the players. The employment contract is a two-way street. To succeed, it must meet the needs of both sides, the employer and the employee. Government sets the framework, funds incentives for training, wage subsidies and information programs. If the government action does not achieve its purpose, public dollars are wasted and cynicism grows. Well, let me move briefly to our 56 recommendations. This is a big number, as my former colleague Paul Keating used to say about budget. This is a big number, but I hope that the proposals we are putting forward are practical and well-grounded in what employers need and what will work for individuals. They make up a broad national and collaborative approach. They do not require massive new dollars from government, a very important point to make in the middle of an election campaign and arguments about budgets. They do not require massive new dollars, nor do they impose difficulty or overly complicated processes on employers. Definitely not an increase in the dreaded red tape. Well, some of our priorities for government, I'll just go through them briefly. We want a Minister for Longevity in Cabinet to oversee the economic aspects of our ageing population. We want government to implement and report on national workforce strategies to lift labour force participation of older Australians and Australians with disability. We want the Commonwealth to adopt targets for the employment of older people and people with disability within the Australian public service. And for the private sector, we would like to see the role of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency expanded to become the Workplace Gender Equality and Diversity Agency, so that that agency could also collect data on disability employment age patterns within employers as well as gender data. Then we'd know where we were. So today we have the benefit of a panel consisting of 4 Australian companies who are leading the way. But before I introduce them, I'd like to focus on what it is employers can do in a summary of what we think employers can do. First of all, we think employers should set their own targets for inclusive workplaces. We're not recommending mandated or legislated targets, but we do encourage employers to set their own targets. We think leaders need to commit to inclusive workplaces. We think employers should collect baseline data so that you can monitor progress. Ensure the work environment, including ICT, is fully accessible. Insist on non-discriminatory recruitment and retention practices. Offer flexible work arrangements wherever possible. Facilitate transitions, a very important concept, transition, either transition to retirement or transition to work in other industries or occupations, or transition for those re-entering the workforce. Target training for older workers and people with disability, and train managers to manage diversity and inclusion. We've based many of these recommendations on examples of good practice identified over the course of the inquiry. Many businesses out there do recognise the diverse skills and ability of older Australians and Australians with disability. And we're fortunate to be joined this morning by representatives of such executive companies, Transgrid, Crown Resorts, FNP Group and Forest Coach Lines. Shortly, I'll introduce these special guests. But it's also worth noting other employers who are making bold commitments and developing innovative programs. Employers like Accor Hotel Group. Accor have introduced an experienced worker program for people over 50, recognising the skills and experience this group of workers bring. Accor have reported excellent results. St John of God Healthcare has committed to supporting people with disability get jobs. They have partnered with Disability Employment Services to ensure that candidates shortlisted for interviews include at least one eligible applicant registered with a disability employment service. In recent times, they have successfully employed 51 people with disability. And this year, the New South Wales Public Service became the latest large employer to have announced the introduction of an all-roles flex policy. Premier Baird announced this on International Women's Day. He announced that 100% of jobs in the New South Wales Public Service would be flexible by 2019 on the basis of if not, why not. So I hope all of the people who deal with the New South Wales Public Service will keep Premier Baird to that very important commitment. And of course, we've all heard of Bunnings. Their stunning business success is based to a significant extent on their high levels of employment of older workers with relevant trade or building or other experience. The inquiry's recommendations are cognizant of the reality of the needs of our national economy now and through future decades. We must ensure that skilled older workers in sections that are shrinking, such as car manufacturing or coal mining, are not forced into long-term unemployment or involuntary early retirement. The key to supporting such workers is access to effective skills training that will lead them into growth sectors and jobs that actually exist. And we make several recommendations along these lines. There are new jobs in Australia, plenty of them. For example, in the growth of robotics and IT, renewable energy, the expanding aged care and disability sectors, and even the latest submarine building program. Now, this massive project is expected to create 2,800 Australian jobs. Some of these jobs should be opportunities for older workers appropriately retrained, say from the car manufacturing industry in South Australia. They should be able to take up some of these jobs. And I have in mind here a proposal for accelerated mature age apprenticeships. Now, we do know that what works for large companies may not work always for small to medium-sized enterprises. But having said that, many small employers who we spoke with had very innovative ideas and approaches. For small business owners, we could see greater access to customised support and information would help them employ older people and people with disability. We became crucially aware as we started the inquiry that poor management of health issues accounts for more people being forced out of work prematurely than any other factor. So we took advice from a panel of health policy experts, and we do recommend initiatives to create healthy workplaces and provide practical support so that older workers who may develop problems associated with ageing can continue in their jobs. We have recommended further review or change to some existing laws. The rules around workers' compensation and insurance, especially income maintenance insurance, can act as barriers to people continuing their employment. In relation to anti-discrimination laws generally, we have proposed some changes in the matters of definitions, and we want to improve simplicity for individuals claiming discrimination on a number of protected grounds. For example, problems with age and disability together, or gender and age, as frequently happened. With regard to fair work, we suggest that some fair work provisions in relation to the right to request flexible hours or unfair dismissal on the grounds of discrimination are due for review. So we have proposed a few measures of law reform, but most of the report goes to the reform of the labour market, to attitudes, policies and practices at all stages of employment. Now, I'm confident that the changes we propose are realistic, they are evidence-based and are already in place in some workplaces. This report is a reflection of the contributions of many people, and I'm grateful to those who took time to attend a consultation, write a submission or assist with the inquiry. I thank my Commissioner colleagues, President Gillian Triggs, especially Mick Gooder, Indigenous and Social Justice Commissioner, who undertook consultations with Indigenous communities, and former Commissioner Tim Wilson, who also assisted with relevant LGBTI aspects. I'm particularly grateful to the inquiry team, led by Marlene Krasovitsky, and to the distinguished experts who comprised our 4 expert advisory committees and gave us such sound and fruitful direction. I trust that the findings and recommendations of this inquiry will spark action and commitment and intensify efforts to address employment discrimination against older people and those people with disabilities, so that all of those who are willing to work can work. We all stand to gain. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before we proceed to the panel discussion, it's my great pleasure to introduce Emeritus Professor Ron McCallum, AO, who gave us a lot of assistance with this inquiry. Ron's CV is so long and so distinguished, but the highlights: he was the Foundation Blake Dawson Waldron Professor in Industrial Law in the Faculty of Law at the University of Sydney until 2007, and this was the first full professorship in industrial law at any Australian university. Ron is the first totally blind person to have been appointed to a full professorship in any field at any university in Australia or New Zealand. And in 2011, he was the Dean of the Faculty of Law, preceding our distinguished President, Gillian Triggs. They get very classy deans over at Sydney University. And of course, he was elected to the first Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability of the United Nations, which monitors compliance with the Convention, on the Rights of People with Disability, a huge international impact as well as a national impact. So Ron, please address us and give us your views about the topic.
President Professor Gillian Triggs, who is a beacon to us all in the field of human rights, Commissioner Susan Ryan and Race Discrimination Commissioner, special welcome to Commissioners Designate, my good friend Dr. Kay Patterson and my equally good friend Alistair McEwen. Can I just say, as a rider, often some of these jobs go to blind people or wheelies, people in wheelchairs. I think it's very special and important that one of our deaf brothers has this job and will give greater prominence to those who are deaf or hard of hearing. I wish to obviously acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. You know, I feel an empathy with the elders. The elders are the custodians of the law. And as an emeritus professor, which is academic speak for has been, I feel myself a custodian of our laws, so I offer them my deepest respect. When Commissioner Susan Ryan asked me to join a reference group, I said, is this for the aged or disability? I qualify for both. And she said, disability will do. What stood out for me in the report is that the employment rate of we people with disabilities has not moved for 20 years. It's about now 53%. About 20 years ago, it was about 52%. It dropped to 51%. It's now up, but it's remained the same despite the increases in technology and despite the higher standing of persons with disabilities in the community. Oh, and I forgot, I apologise. I want to acknowledge Miss Mary Ann Diamond from the NDIS, but more importantly, she is the president of the world's umbrella disability body, the International Disability Alliance. It's great to have you here. In 2012, the Australian Parliament, in a bipartisan move, enacted the National Disability Insurance Scheme Act. When you read the report from the Productivity Commission, it was sold to the government and to the public on the grounds that it wouldn't cost much because with the increased numbers of persons with disabilities in the workforce, productivity would jump up by billions of dollars, and Commissioner Ryan gave you the exact figures. Problem is, the NDIS of itself won't increase the employment of we people with disabilities. It will make us more ready, it will educate us better, it will help us out of our homes, but it does not take the step, nor was it designed to take the step of obtaining jobs for us. And this requires as the report so ably shows, an enormous change in public attitudes, attitudes of employers, attitudes of trade unions, and attitudes of the general public. My first experience of disability employment was when I was 6. I was then involved in segregated education at the Royal Victorian Institute for the Blind in Melbourne, which had modernised its name a few years before I attended. It was the Royal Victorian Asylum for the Blind. But of course, the word asylum in the 19th and 20th centuries had a slightly different meaning from the pejorative meaning we now use. In our playground, there was this wire fence. I'm pointing along, there was this wire fence, and we knew that that was the factory. Because when we were playing in an afternoon, we heard the knock-off hooter. And I even learned at the age of 6 that this was where blind people made brooms and baskets. And in the early 50s, it was quite a badge of honour to have a basket for shopping made by blind people. One staff member was being obstreperous to me, and she said, in 10 years' time, when you're 16, you'll be over the other side and I won't be responsible for you. I was suffering, or our family was suffering, domestic violence at home through a father who was suffering World War II, post-traumatic stress, etc. And I thought, life isn't looking too good if I end up over the other side of the fence. And I remember sitting on my kindergarten teacher's knee, and she told me that I wouldn't end up there. And actually, she read me books when I was in law school, believe it or not. But what it's shown me, I think, is that although attitudes are changing, and they've changed a great deal in the last 6 decades, and although technology has helped those of us with sensory disabilities, blindness and deafness, and although buildings are now far more accessible for my sisters and brothers in wheelchairs, and even for me, we still need to change public attitudes. And I think that's the big message from the report. Now, Commissioner Susan did mention that I was an inaugural member and chair of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and my mandate after 2 terms has finished. And I don't like talking about the past. I hear too many people talking about what they did 10, 20 years ago. So I've looked at the more recent reports, and I just want to make the following comments. Article 27 of the Convention for We Persons with Disabilities makes it very clear that we have a right to work, as Gillian so ably noted, a right to work in the labour market for the same wages as everyone else. And the article is detailed. When countries come to dialogue with the committee, and now I think we've had about 36, it's interesting that 17 of the 18 members of the current committee are persons with disabilities. But when you look at their questions to governments on Article 27, they're shy. They'll ably talk about discrimination, importantly talk about violence and sexual violence for women and girls with disabilities. But they pussyfoot around, and I guess I should say I pussyfooted around in the past. Why? I think because all we people with disabilities know that it's really hard in most countries to get work. And so when we start questioning governments, we're a little bit diffident because we know in our own lived experiences that it's really difficult. And we all know in our hearts that what we need is a change of public attitude, employer attitude, and people attitude. Another interesting thing that I've been looking at all the reports, many governments don't want to change attitudes. That's very hard. So they simply pass a law saying there'll be a quota of people employed with disabilities. And I ran across this in Europe, in Austria, in parts of Germany. It's very strong in Latin America. And when you question the governments in Geneva, they come before us, they say, oh, well, Professor, we have a quota. So all's good. Well, I decided to do some investigating. And I found that the quotas in Argentina were there on the statute books, they weren't enforced. I found in Austria, only 27% of companies over a particular size adhered to the quota. The rest paid a very small extra percentage in their tax increase, in their taxation payments. And if they were good at dodging tax or minimising tax, it wasn't much at all. And a quota system was a cop-out. What we really need from governments is a change of attitude. And we need people to understand that we persons with disabilities can perform many jobs, most jobs, in fact, with technology. We want to work. As the report says, we're willing to work. We work very well. We take less sick leave than do other employees. We have less safety and health issues than other employees. And we rarely, if ever, go on strike. I welcome the report. I applaud Commissioner Susan and her team, with whom I spent many hours. I think this is a superb report for this great Human Rights Commission, and I'm truly honoured to be speaking to you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ron. I mean, I knew Ron would say it all and really express what all this is about. And of course, he did. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite our 4 industry representatives to come up and take a seat. And while they're doing that, Susan Honeyman, who is from the FMP group in Ballarat, Chiara Van Vliet from Transgrid, Ian McDonald from the APTIA, the National Bus Transport Association, and Demir Kukan from Crown. Now, each of these represents a company that's entirely different in character from every other one. As you notice, 3 of them are representing manufacturing and technical kinds of companies, where we often think it would be more difficult for older people or people with disabilities to gain employment. All of them have put in place highly successful strategies to increase the employment of older people or the employment of people with disability, or both. So what I'd like to do is invite each of the panel to tell us fairly briefly why your company decided it was going to do something about the employment of older people or the people with disability. And with that, after that general statement is about why your company did it, we'll have a few more questions, including questions from the floor. So, Susan, I'd like to start with you, Susan Honeyman. Why did FMP decide a few years ago now to increase the recruitment and retention of older people?
Hi everybody, I'm Susan, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'd love to say it was a strategic move that we made, but it was really by accident that we started working in this field. We started off with a review of our work cover premium, which led to a review of our demographic, and once we looked at our demographic and the work cover data, we quickly discovered that it wasn't our older workers that were accessing work cover, it was actually our middle-aged workers. And looking at our demographic, it made us realise how many older workers we had and what impact that would have on our business in the future if we didn't do something about protecting the skill and knowledge that those people delivered to our business. So,
excuse me a moment, Susan, I neglected to say your company's based in Ballarat,
that's right, yep.
Which made a significant, is a significant aspect of the whole thing.
And we're in the dreaded automotive industry, so we will almost have the trifecta, regionally located in the automotive industry. Yeah. So we needed to change the mindset of our workforce to reflect the contribution that our older workers made to the business. And more importantly, because our middle-aged workers were the ones that were accessing work cover, we needed to change their mindset because they were going to age over time, and that could have led to disaster for us and our costs associated with work cover. So we did have a looming problem ahead of us. We also had the potential for hundreds of hours of skill and experience to leave the business all at once. So 25% of our workforce could retire. And if they all walked out at the same time, and the traditional way is they come and resign and leave 4 weeks later, it would have left a huge skill and knowledge hole in our business. We were already having difficulty replacing senior roles because of our regional location and our industry. And you know, traditionally it might take us 5 or 6 months to get somebody to take up a senior role in our organisation. So despite the fact that we were a very systemised organisation and very structured in the way we did our work, There was key areas of the business that were critical, and as much as we'd like to say systems deliver results, we relied very heavily on a number of individuals to deliver those results. And after that demographic review, it really did make us sit there and think, shit, are we ready for what's coming our way?
Okay, thanks. Very clear statement. Now, Gillian, now, the bus company. Tell us about that and your older bus drivers.
Yeah, look, there's about 50,000 bus drivers driving buses around the country today, thereabouts, and the average age of those bus drivers is 55 plus. You know, we're not an industry where young persons leave school and they tell their mates, I'm going into the bus industry and I'm going to drive a bus as a career. In fact, we're right down the bottom of the scale. What we tend to be is persons who have had careers and either done well at them or not done well at them, or been through life's experiences, who are looking for a guaranteed income, where they know they've got a guaranteed job, where they work in a team environment and they can get some security of tenure. And that tends to be people who have second and third career changes. What's interesting at Forest Coach Lines particularly is that, you know, they've got ex-bank managers, ex-lawyers. You'd be amazed at it's always a difficult negotiation for the enterprise agreements with them, because the drivers are actually smarter than we are, and it's not that easy. But it's the career of somebody who's led a very high-powered existence in one manner, fashion or form, is just looking for a different thing. What our industry has always provided is it does provide the flexibility that we hear about and talk about so often with modern industrial relations, because in our industry there are bus depots spread right across the country. In the larger metropolitan cities, as you would imagine, there are bus depots spread all around the suburbs, and in the country areas there are bus depots. So the opportunity is available. And what I try to impress on Susan, if she may remember, is that we were looking for positive discrimination. In other words, we positively discriminate in relation to aged employees, because they're our client base. And so that was the reason. And it was said by Ron and you and Gillian as well, that it makes good sense to actually employ older people in that environment. It's actually good for business. And Ron said it, and he's quite right, is that older people are more reliable. They've had life's experiences and they understand the requirement, and particularly in our industry where you have to meet deadlines and schedules, and you've actually got to turn up every day because the bus has got to go out, the kids have got to get to school. So we're in an industry where we rely on some degree of maturity, and that maturity is offered to us for older people. So one of the things that we understood right from the start, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is that good health is the panacea of all productivity and all ability to retain employment. And that's why we focused so heavily on the health and well-being of our aged population, because we saw that as a key towards keeping these aged employees.
Very important. Now, Kiara, briefly, on Transgrid.
Briefly, well, similar to Susan, we needed to. We were
Just tell them what know what Transgrid is.
So Transgrid provides electricity transmission for New South Wales. So we connect the end users to the generators and distributors. So we were at particular risk of losing key older talent, like many other organisations. So our strategies have differed around what we can do for people, whether it's flexibility for an individual to enable them to keep working and having a flexible career, or freeing someone up to share their knowledge with their colleagues and transitioning to a different style of work. To us, a diverse and inclusive workplace means a workplace where everyone can contribute to the best of their ability. And without doing these types of things and being agile in our response, we would have lost really valuable knowledge and skills, whether that was through people leaving or becoming disengaged. So that's it, briefly.
That's it. Now, Demir Kukin from Crown Resort. I was absolutely thrilled to discover when we were looking for employers who are focusing on opportunities for people with disability, that Crown, such a large employer and ever growing it would seem, was doing just that. So give us a brief outline of your disability employment program, please, Demir.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Can I just say it's a real privilege to be here today as well. I think most people will be aware of Crown Resorts. We have properties in Perth and Melbourne, and certainly there's been a lot of attention in Sydney in more recent times. I suppose our progress into the disability employment area, and we call Crown Ability, was really a logical extension of our customer base and our employee base. It's very diverse. Our employees, for instance, 60% of our employees are actually born overseas. Compare that to the national average of 25, and it's quite staggering. And when you look at our customer base as well, very diverse, and it really started with our Indigenous employment program back 6 or 7 years ago. And at the time, we deliberately made a decision to get involved in extending our focus on diversity in stages. We basically didn't want to bite off more than we could chew. We learned a lot from our Indigenous employment program in terms of what the key issues were, and importantly, the systemic approach that you actually had to adopt in order to be successful. So then we decided 2 years ago to enter the area of disability, and we've taken on the learnings from our Indigenous employment program, applied it to the area of disability. It's great for our brand. There's no question about that. Importantly, it taps into the potential of people that we have in society, and going back to how we grow as a society, both economically and from a social perspective, there's a lot of people there that we just don't tap into. And the other aspect too is that it actually helps with innovation. If you have a bunch of Anglo white people sitting around a table and everyone agreeing with each other, I don't think we'll see progress in a way that we could if we had a really and truly diverse composition within the workforce. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Now we've had the brief introduction. I'd just like to throw a specific question at each one of you, but say whatever else you'd like to say, and then we'll go to the audience. Now, first of all, Susan, you spoke about wanting to keep your older workers and putting things in place. How do you manage the fact that eventually even your valued and well-supported older workers will want to transition to retirement? How do you manage that change?
We actually have a program that we run, and it's a multifaceted program, and it's all about the employee. So we've got a model, it's called the You Incorporated, and the person's in the middle, and then we try and look at what support can we give our employees to help them plan for their transition to retirement. And that's things like education, family support, community support, your beliefs, your ability to continue to learn. And we try and provide programs to our workers to help them rate themselves on that model and have a think about retirement. So when we started doing this, some people said to me, why the hell are you making me think about this? I'm just going to retire and life will go on. And it took us a couple of years to get people to commit to the program and actually realise the benefit in the program. And superannuation, education, life coaching, things that older workers have never been exposed to and never think, I need to participate in that. So we did a lot of work with that in groups. We invited family members to come along and participate in that as well. And we had our younger workers asking, why aren't I being asked to those things? So now we've expanded it off to our younger workers. The second part was we have a program called Joint Action, and it's all about taking care of yourself. So there's a few parts to that. One is healthy movement. So we have someone come in 3 times a month, and our employees go and participate in some healthy movement classes where they learn to particularly address the parts of their bodies that they overuse in our factory. We educated our employees the difference between an ache, a pain and an injury. We want them to tell us when they've got an ache. We don't want them to wait till it's a pain or an injury and it's going to take months to get better. We need to know the minute they start aching. We have a physio come in each month. He doesn't actually perform physio. He just gives educative physio. So he might write a referral to a physio, but he develops programs for people to manage their own ailments in the hope that we catch it when it's an ache and he he doesn't end up having to see them as an injured person. And we have an ergonomist that comes onto site and assesses everything from your workstation to your path you might take during a day, the repetitious activities you might do, and we have a system on our computers called break time, which reminds people to have a rest and a stretch and take care of themselves. And the other part was we managed to get a transition to retirement section into our enterprise bargaining agreement, and that took a little bit of a battle because it was about 8 or 9 years ago, and the unions didn't want us to have that. And I guess it's just all about building that rapport with our employees so that they have the confidence to come and talk to us about the future and not just come and resign and say I'm leaving in a month's time.
Well, that's so interesting. And I think, you know, when you describe what you did to do with the health and the financial planning and education about superannuation, healthy workplaces, I think every employer, Gillian, we do some of that, but not all here at the Commission, every employer could actually improve the productivity of their business by following those steps. So it's extremely interesting that, you know, a small company in Ballarat developed all this and is really leading. But Ian, I'd like to pass to you because I was very impressed when we met before about the health promotion aspects, recognising that you have got an older workforce, that, you know, people in their 50s, 60s are starting to get some age-related issues, but you have put so many constructive, practical things in place to help your employees maintain and indeed improve their health. And I'd really like to hear about those.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. As you said, having identified that health and wellbeing was an important criteria of an aged employment population, we were able to secure funding. The old DWA with the previous government gave quite a significant amount of funding, and through the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we were able to get funding because a lot of this work, of course, is costly, and we partnered with an independent rehabilitation provider, which was really important. In our industry, for instance, the management has difficulty going to their employees trying to tell them they should be responsible for their health. It's much easier if somebody independent is coming along and they're talking in a general way. The employees are more likely to take it up. So what we did was we surveyed our broad membership across the country and sort of tried to identify aspects of our industry. In other words, we tried to get to know our industry. In other words, work out relationships between middle management and employees, find out things that were creating problems in our industry, including obviously aspects of the personal lives of our employees as well, which impacts on their health and well-being. So once we had that survey, we were then looking to embark on testing it, trialling it amongst operators. So that's where Forest Coastlines agreed to come on board, and this was a trial process that they undertook over a period of about 6 to 9 months, in which the rehabilitation providers and APTIA got involved at the grassroots level with the company. We surveyed them to try and find out, in other words, the first step in this whole process was knowing your industry. In other words, working out what the psychological, what the cognitive, what the physical, what the environmental aspects of the business was. And in our case, it was fairly simple. Our employees drove these massive, big 12.5-tonne vehicles, a lot of times in congested areas where they had a lot of interaction with members of the public, where they were required to sit for long periods of time, that they had short periods of time to take their breaks, for instance. And that they were constantly moving their bodies around in a static way, looking at left to right and all the things you do when you're driving large vehicles. So having identified all of that, we sat down with the workforce at Forest and identified some initiatives that could be implemented to try to improve and well-being, and we trialled that over a period of 6 months, and the trial included a whole range of things, many of which I'm sure you all do. The most successful one was just a fruit bowl. It's amazing, that was the most successful thing of the whole thing, was just giving them fruit every day. We had to stop them taking it home for the family, of course, but But then it ranged from a whole range of other things, including where they took their breaks, negotiating with food outlets where they took their breaks. You know, the problem with a bus driver when you've got 15 minutes to go and get something to eat and there's a Chico roll in the Bain Marie, you're going to get the Chico roll. You're not going to ask the person to make a nice salad sandwich for you, which might take 5 minutes, which is, you know, half your break. So we had all of these things in place. So people with Forest coach lines that were easily identifiable with obviously their uniforms were able to go in and get at a discounted rate more healthy food, and that was just another thing. The availability of EAPs, you know, the employment assistance providers, worked fantastically. Forest was quite a small company, so it wasn't large, but they still implemented this EAP system, and it was amazing the number of employees that just used it, sometimes for their own personal life. But when you've got your personal life under control, your work life is also under control. And there are a range of other things, you know, the Fitbit, you know, drivers are quite competitive amongst each other, so we had trials of these Fitbits, you know, depending on how you walk, and I've done the Fitbit, and it actually does work because you start competing against yourself, and it is a really good thing. And there was a range of other things. We had local physiotherapists and local doctors happy to come into the workshop because they're all looking to create client bases, and so we were able to give the drivers a lot of information about their own health, etc., on an individual consultation basis. We then trialled it at the end of we did the survey again at the end of the trial. One of the things that they implemented, of course, was a refresher course on bullying and harassment. In the bus industry, like a lot of industries, there is a cultural bullying and harassment hierarchy in that culture, and it was amazing to see these bullish bus drivers, you know, going into meetings with young ladies who were, you know, psychologists and so forth, and outlining life in the non-harassment and bullying process, and them coming out and being absolutely empowered as to understanding what bullying and harassment was. Because a lot of times in the workplace, they just take that for granted. It's a culture that builds up. They don't really even know they're bullying and harassing people. So what happened at the end of that trial was we surveyed, and we found there was a much improved relationship with middle management. We found actually employees wanting to take responsibility for their own health, and, you know, giving up smoking was one of the big things. You wouldn't think that, but giving up smoking was a big thing. So I don't want to say that this is all just this is just Christmas cake, and you know, I don't want you to think that this is just some magic solution. It isn't. But in the instance that we did with Forest Coach Lines, we saw that you can implement these sorts of changes, and they do work. And what happened was, you do keep your employees. They are an aged population. You give them security of employment, and it does work. And that's the task that we're committed to continue, Susan, as you know, and that's an advantage to our industry.
Well, it's an advantage to your industry. It's an advantage to all the people who use buses and get on and off buses, that the drivers are much healthier and happier and so on. And it's an advantage to all of us by providing such a practical example of how you dealt with the particular issues and got the good outcomes for your business, for them, and for the customers. So it's a great story. Now, Chiara, if flexibility at Transgrid has been a big thing, and you've been successful in providing flexibility to enhance the employment, say, of people with disability, people who are carers. Now, that's a common to every workplace, but not every workplace at the moment is providing the right sort of flexibility. Would you like to tell us a little bit about why you started to do it at Transgrid and how it's going?
Sure. So we have a long history of flexibility at Transgrid. A condensed work week, the 9-day fortnight, is the standard work arrangement for most employees on our enterprise agreement. And in the last agreement, we also added in flexi time. So people in our Sydney-based offices, because we have field-based workers and office-based workers, so in the offices can now choose between flexi time and 9-day fortnight just as standard. For our more senior contract officers, it isn't prescribed the hours that they do. They can select their own flexibility around that. And we also have a flexibility arrangements procedure, which is accessible to everybody, to look at more specific types of flexibility. So with that procedure, we require our managers to come and consult with human resources before they make a response. And the purpose for that is for us to help coach them through that process and help us mitigate any potential decline, appeal kind of situation. If we can work through the manager with the beginning and put in a successful flexibility arrangement rather than having that conflict. And we help work around those, and perhaps if a manager's not comfortable and they're not sure how it'll work, we'll suggest a trial to show that these things do work. We can, you know, work together to see the right arrangement for the team and the employee. Yeah, so a few examples of work we've had. We've had quite a few people look at transition to retirement, so working a different type of condensed hours pattern so they can maintain full-time work over less days, so, you know, moving to 4 days.
Can they nominate what
Yes.
package of hours they want to work?
Yes, so the arrangement, the procedure is not prescriptive. We don't say you can choose A, B or C. We leave it quite open to people to nominate, to come to us and say, this is the type of arrangement I'm looking for. And so we've also had people put forward, oh, I've got so much leave accrued, can I use a day of leave a week? And, you know, transition to part-time but maintain their full-time pay. And with a lot of our employees being on defined benefits arrangements, this has been particularly important for them to maintain that pay. So it's been good to see the different type of things that people have brought forward. We've also had people who have retired and then returned later down the track.
Does that work?
It works really well. It's really a great benefit for us to be able to bring that knowledge and skill back into the business that we might have lost, and really beneficial for that employee who's decided maybe retirement isn't exactly what I wanted and I do want to continue contributing, so it's fantastic to have them back. Yeah.
Thanks. Now, Demir, when we met before, you told us that under your disability program you were placing 3 people with disability a month, yes, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Would you like to tell us a bit about how you recruit those employees and how you prepare the rest of the workforce to understand and support the fact that their new colleague is a person with disability? How does that all work out in practice?
Thanks. Yeah, we set ourselves targets. I'm actually amazed that even a debate about targets, it's generally accepted in management circles that targets drive performance, just as in our own personal lives, targets or personal goals drive success, drive learning. So very early on, we set ourselves a target. Now, importantly, we actually thought 3 a month was modest. Ian Slarkus, our program manager for Crown Ability, is very enthusiastic, and he wanted higher targets. But after some discussion, we came to the conclusion that you can overdo it from the point of view that you're bringing people into a system, into a culture. And it's very important that those systems and that culture can actually cope with that level of change. So I think it's better. Sometimes people talk about stretch targets, which is great. But then if the system and the culture doesn't cope with that, it affects the credibility of the program, and I think more importantly, it impacts on the self-esteem of the actual participants themselves. So in terms of recruitment, we have preferred providers in terms of our DES providers, and so we have people being recruited through that channel, and also directly. And we have a number of people that we have employed directly. In terms of our targets, we set ourselves a target of 102 at the end of the conclusion of this financial year. We've now reached 108, which is great, and next year it'll be 138. In terms of preparing, if you like, the culture in the organisation, we focus on 5 elements which cut across providers, pre-employment, the actual recruitment process. So it's very important for our recruitment team to understand what we're trying to achieve and the sort of things that you have to do in recruitment in the area of disability. Post-placement support, absolutely critical. I think it's traumatic for anyone to be entering a new workplace, let alone someone who has a disability. So being able to, if you like, provide a secure base for people under the program is very important in those first few days, weeks and months. And we also have, importantly, awareness raising workshops for our managers and employees, so that they understand, and as Ian taught me the term of a disability confident organisation, because I think quite often it's not that people are against it, it's a question of awareness and maybe ignorance, and then people feel reluctant. And if you open that up, then people are far more accepting.
Well, you've heard 4 really most impressive accounts of what these employers are doing, how they're going about it, the success they're having, and of course the bottom line, since we're talking about businesses, their businesses are profiting. But I'd like to give members of the audience now an opportunity to ask any of our panellists a specific question. We've got about 10 minutes to go. And if someone's from the media, if they would identify themselves when they ask the question, but in fact everyone might like to identify themselves. And I see Aloma, I think you're going to ask the first question.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. That was truly wonderful and a real learning experience, I've got to say. Just a comment really with Ian that especially impressed me, if I heard you correctly and I didn't misinterpret. What I thought I heard was that you acknowledged the fact that your clients were older as well as your drivers. And I thought that was absolutely critical. And as Susan said about business, it never ceases to amaze me that organisations don't consider that older people actually are customers. And so many older people do say, you know, well, they don't want to deal with me. They think I'm too old. Yet we're all customers and we all have money and we all vote. But I think that was, I thought that was great that you did that. And I'd like to know more about that.
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, people who take public transport are obviously kids who get transported to and from school, but also people who take public transport are older people who require public transport because either they no longer drive or they might only have one car in the family. Often they're being taken down to their local shops or to the hospitals or to the doctors, and it is very important to acknowledge what your customer base is. So part of any training that a bus driver gets relates back to their customer base as well. So you do hear a lot of politicians correctly talk about public transport in the terms of passengers, and that's been drummed into our industry by, you know, 90% of our industry are government contracted base operations, and governments of all states, of all persuasions, push this concept of the passenger is your customer and that's how you should be focusing your operations. So that's a little bit off, you know, what we're actually just talking about today, but I'm agreeing with you in another way that that's exactly where the industry is headed as well.
Good. Well, speaking as an older person who is a bus user, I am very pleased to hear it. Do we have another question?
Peter Brady from the IRT in Illawarra. I'd like to congratulate each of you and your organisation on the great job you're doing in breaking down those barriers for mature age employment. But my question is to all the panel, as a former CEO and a manager, etc., etc. One of the key things we would do is MBAs, and we'd do training, whatever, etc., to work at exploiting our junior staff. How do we get the knowledge and the experience and expertise from them to enhance the organisation and the productivity? I'd like to just ask you, with the programs you're doing, are there things there where you've got these older people that have joined your workplace that you're actually engaging with the younger workers, the younger managers, and they're learning and enhancing from the knowledge of those older workers, as opposed to just employing the older worker to do a task?
A good question. Susan, do you want to kick off?
Yep. So one of the parts of our program is asking our mature workers how they would like to exit the workforce in a dignified way. And quite often they say, oh, I'd like to be a trainer, or I'd like to be a mentor or a coach. So we do have a coaching program. Unfortunately, while everyone would like to be a coach or a mentor, some people just don't have the skills. So sometimes you do have to have that difficult conversation and, you know, help the person understand, thanks for volunteering, but you haven't got the right skill set.
Thanks, but no thanks, I will.
Yeah. And because we do rely on people in a lot of instances, we have started a process where everyone develops their own work manual. and to try and capture that knowledge. And we're owned by Honeywell, so we have a lot of rules around recruiting, but just of late we've tried to get early approval when we know someone's going to retire, get their replacement in 3 or 6 months in advance so that their replacement can spend that whole time learning what they can from the mature worker. Yeah, and I suppose never discount. Lots of times, and our managers do it, a lot of been said today about mindset change. A lot of our managers say, well, why bother training him? He's going to retire anyway. But don't do that, because it's amazing the willingness of our older workers. Gee, they still want to learn new stuff and pick up new skills and continue to contribute. So don't push them aside and assume that that's not for them.
Right. Kiara, any mentoring or between generations?
Definitely. I definitely agree with continue to train. We have employees in our organisation who are working into their 70s and have given no indication that they're ready to retire, and we're very grateful for that. We have an expert in the field who is in his 70s, and we've identified we're probably going to need about 3 people to replace him when he moves on at the moment.
Oh, I only got 2 to replace me.
So definitely we have people move into a knowledge sharing type role where they're mentoring other employees to take on, to just accumulate some of that knowledge that they have themselves over a very long career. So definitely where it's been identified those particular type of skills, we have had people where we've helped them free up their time so that they're able to do that. I think that's very important, recognising the importance of that and not just expecting that someone's going to do those tasks and then on top of that be also focused, trying to do that on the side. We have made an effort where we've seen particular risks to free that person up to be able to engage in that and share what they've learned, because it's very important.
Dimir, I haven't asked you this before, but are any of the people with disability you're now employing, are they older people? Is there any kind of generational mix there, or are they all pretty young workers starting out?
Yeah, I'd say that's right. And we really don't factor that in terms of the recruitment process. But generally speaking, I think you'd say they're on the younger side of things.
Yeah, but they'll be so successful, they'll still be there when they're old, and then you can have these intergenerational sharings things. And Ian, mentoring?
Yeah, look, it is a good question. In the bus industry, there's almost a 0 unemployment rate. We're looking for drivers all the time. If you can get a driver authority, you can start a career in the bus industry without any trouble. There is a seniority issue. It is another battleground. We struggle to get younger people into our industry, and we do try, that's another battleground for us, if you like, and we do try to get younger people in. But there is a degree of seniority that does exist in bus depots, and I wouldn't want to hide behind that and say that it doesn't exist. It's just another challenge for us, and that is, how do we get younger people into our industry? The reality of life is, with youth unemployment, the bus industry would substantially reduce that number if we could convince young people that driving a bus was a worthwhile career. But we struggle to do that because, as you know, buses aren't sexy. Trams are, trains are, but buses aren't, unfortunately. And we're just working on trying to find a sexy bus. But double deckers aren't too bad, actually. Double deckers are quite good. People like double deckers, but they don't like those single ones.
Oh, okay. Well, look, we're learning. I mean, I didn't know there was a sort of a hierarchy of sexiness amongst different transport vehicles, but I do now. Now we'll take one last question.
Yes. Hi, I'm Leonie Jackson, and I'm the CEO of the Deaf Society, New South Wales. A question for Dimir. Obviously, I'm very interested in recruiting people with disabilities in that area. And I'm wondering about your advice, or if you could tell me how to create an inclusive environment, how you have been able to for all people with disabilities and also people that don't have disabilities. And if there are any tips or programs implemented where you can explain to other people about working with people in disabilities and having an inclusive environment.
That's a great question. Look, I think there's some very, first, a very basic point. I think it's about respect first. And if you are to have an inclusive culture, it's got to be leadership-led. and it's got to be a very important part of the value set. So one of our values is to do the right thing, and another value that we have is to work as a team. And that doesn't mean to work as a team excluding certain people. So from that point of view, it's got to be totally inclusive. I think there's also a challenge at the recruitment end as well. There's always the issue around job fit. And in our organisation, we work 24/7. Now, that is a challenge for anyone. So it's very important from the perspective of being able to cope potentially with shift work, and also being able to cope with a customer environment, or in a customer environment which can be demanding in itself. A very diverse customer environment, by the way. But getting that right, getting our providers when they are recruiting to understand our culture and the way we work is very important. All those things then make for a greater probability of getting the job fit right, ensuring then that we have greater success in terms of the people that are entering the workforce. And then, apart from the awareness raising, I think over time, people become more understanding, more tolerant, just through being involved, just by seeing people who are different. And it's okay to be different. So there's other aspects involved in that, but I could probably talk for the next hour on that. We don't have the time.
Well, you could talk for another hour. You could talk for many more hours, because I think we're all learning so much about the very enlightened, successful approach this major employer is taking, thus giving, inspiration to everyone else who's not. But I think you'll all agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that all of our companies here and there, most terrific representatives, have really convinced anyone who remained to be convinced that older people with disability, can be very successful employees, can contribute enormously to the success of a business of any size, no matter what the product of the business is, if they are recruited properly, if they're supported properly, if they're placed, your last point was very important to me, placed in the right role for their abilities, then everything can go forward. So look, I'm hoping that as a result of what you've been able to tell us, and your accounts are of course in our report, Willing to Work, I'm hoping that the accounts of all these successful employers of diversity will really have an impact on all employers throughout Australia, public and private, small, large, cities, regional, so that we get to our great objective, which is everyone who is willing to work can work to their benefit and the benefit of all Australians. So thank you everyone for coming today and assisting in the consideration of this great objective. Thank you. Now we do have refreshments, and I hope you can all stay, but those of you who can stay, please stay and network and get even more inspired by how we're going to make all this possible. And thanks particularly to our Auslan interpreters. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie. Explaining you all.
Thank you. Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Good to hear some more ideas.
Yeah, well, guys are doing stuff too, so there's not many